again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And once again, Bob, we're pre-taping. This time we're taping on a Wednesday before our Monday scheduled air date. And all kinds of things breaking. And we don't want to get into conspiracy theories, and we don't want to try to rehash what's been running around. So let's go back to our perspective approach again.
Sure. Give a little background on what's breaking at the moment.
Yeah, there are like three main stories that pretty much will still be with us because they're going to be with us as long as Trump is in the White House. But the way they keep breaking, it tends to be pretty much the Trump immigration moves.
Right.
You've got Mississippi raids on the like. You've got Ken Cucinelli and Stephen Miller pushing the assault on legal immigrants.
Right.
So those stories are not going to go away. You've got basically the increase in white supremacist shooters, wannabe shooters, people being arrested for threatening behavior and threatening tweets and whatever. That's in the news, and of course, we'll deal with El Paso and Dayton.
Right.
And then the third one, of course, is the fact that there's been a new study that says police shootings are one of the major causes of death in black and brown males in the country. It's a major study that says this is a high incidence of these deaths, and it's an actual causality. It's being listed.
Right. I mean, we're at a bad point in this bad state of affairs at the moment between the number of guns, the lack of gun
That's the other major story,
and
lack of gun legislation, right?
And you know, like you just summarized, the immigrant issues, and this piece of research which you're about to get into about how one of the greatest causes of death of people of color
in this country,
yes, is
police shootings.
Yes.
So, but for me though, the overarching backdrop for all these related stories basically is that whole discussion that popped up like 20 years ago. We got this phrase of white privilege,
Right.
and how white people don't understand the privilege that they live in the soup they swim in all their lives. But I remember one of the Yale professors wrote a piece for the New York Times recently talking about she hated that term white privilege because as far as she was concerned, it basically was white dominance, and the fact that white dominance has been baked into white people's existence from the time the country was founded. But
from the time that the first Europeans came over.
Right.
Yeah.
Basically, it's baked into the founding psyche of the country because the founding document, the U.S. Constitution, was basically predicated on a republic founded for white male oligarchs.
Right.
So it's built in there. They basically decimated the indigenous people and took their land because they had superior weapons, and so they had white dominance as part of the founding mythology.
Right.
Manifest destiny moving west. Then, of course, they brought in their peculiar institution because that's the way it was worded in the founding document, the peculiar institution. They never once mentioned the word slavery
Right.
in the Constitution. And so you get these three pillars that's already baked into the psyche. And so these stories that are unfolding today, all this stuff is the fact that this white dominance basically is eroding.
Right, and I mean, this is what was, speaking of baked in, this was basically baked into you and I as we grew up. Because when we went to social studies class in public school, we didn't, it was as if we were being taught that this country was empty when Columbus got here. I mean, and that he pushed west.
He discovered America.
Yes, and that America moved west because, everything was unincorporated, nothing had been claimed.
There was nothing out there.
And it was free for us to go claim lands that obviously indigenous people had lived in it for
thousands of years.
quite successfully and peacefully. So So yeah, it's baked into the way America thinks, and it's part of, I'm sorry, a history of American arrogance.
Yeah, and what's roiling the status quo now, of course, is the fact that the projections are that by 2040, whites will be a minority in this country.
Right.
And a lot of white people just can't deal with that. The Republicans understand that their political base is shrinking, so they're basically using Trump as cover, pushing anti-immigration policies, voter suppression stuff, and disenfranchisement tactics so they can stay in political power. And then you got these crazy shooters who says, oh no, we're not tolerating this. This is an invasion and an infestation, and so they go get their guns, get their AK-47s or their AR-15s, whatever the nomenclature are. They're weapons of war designed for mass killing that shouldn't be on the public streets. But then we get to the Second Amendment brouhaha, how that's been misinterpreted and reinterpreted.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been in Florida, and I understand people who live differently than I do, who actually hunt for their meals every day. They go out into the, legally, they go out and shoot, whatever, ducks, squirrels, and they need their guns. That's part of how they live. But these automatic weapons, these bump stocks, these
100-round magazines.
You don't hunt deer with body armor. I mean, it's astounding what people are trying to protect, and as if you have a right to own something like that.
Yeah.
And then the people involved in the recent incidents, the guy in El Paso, he basically gives up and says, "I am the shooter," and as if he's proud that he did what he came to do.
Yeah, having put out a manifesto.
And having what driven 9 hours, was it?
It's about a 10-hour drive.
Yeah.
From Allen to El Paso.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's astounding that you can drive for 9 hours and not realize the stupidity of what you're about to do.
Hey.
And then in Dayton, I don't know what the issue was there. The person seemed like he just cracked. So I don't know how to judge that.
Yeah. No manifestos.
Yeah.
Seems like random shooting, but
he shot up his sister of all people.
The fact that he's able to get such easy access to these weapons is part of our problem. So that's, I don't know, maybe that's the first big story we should talk about, the easy access of guns and the fact that Mitch McConnell won't even entertain calling the Senate back into session to deal with a number of bills that have already been.
They're sitting there. Yes.
Yeah, but you know what though? Yeah. Let me just get on a soapbox. The bills that are sitting there, let's have more background checks. Let's have this and that. Let's talk about maybe having a longer time period for the FBI can do the background check. Okay. Those are the bills that they are talking about. Let's pass those. There's nothing on there that says let's ban assault weapons.
Right.
And we used to have an assault weapons ban in this country. Nothing there about saying let's make it totally illegal for magazines to be purchased that can carry more than 10 rounds. Right. Anything that's seriously about banning killing weapons, there's not even a bill on the floor for that. So as far as I'm concerned, calling them back to vote on these pastiches, or what do you call them, wallpaper bills that actually do nothing, that's a goddamn waste of time, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, but basically calling the Senate back to deal with this. It's not even watered down. It's just plain diluted to begin with.
Right.
So you're
and they're calling that progress.
Okay.
Jesus Christ, they're killing people every day, and they can't. New Zealand had a mass shooting. 3 days later, they banned the weapons.
They weren't messing with that. I really, really admire how they handled that, because the politicians came out immediately and said, no one's going to define New Zealand like this. And we're going to take care of this now.
We're hemming and hawing about getting a discussion and a law passed for background checks. We're not even talking about banning these weapons. That's a crockish. Load of bull, as far as I'm concerned.
And I don't know where the Ohio, the Dayton person got his weapons. I know he went back to his car, put on the body armor and all that kind of stuff. And we try to be fair here, as much as we talk about how the police can improve, with community relations. The police took that guy out at the door of another bar, had he entered, that would have been like 20 more people down. So I'm going to give him their props.
I commend them for a very prompt response. But
Yeah.
here's where I come from. If he didn't have easy access to
Yes.
the damn gun,
Yes.
people would be alive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That response wouldn't have been necessary.
There you go.
But watching the new tapes they just released, I had to say to myself, wow, those cops got him like at the doorway to his next massacre scene.
Yeah,
So and the only reason they got him is because he wasn't wearing the body armor correctly.
Which was the shooting? These shootings are so fast and furious.
I know.
Which was the shooting where 32 seconds and then 9 people were dead? Was that the Dayton
that was
one?
Dayton.
That's the Dayton one?
Yeah, he took out that many people in that amount of time.
In 32 seconds.
And 15 seconds later, he was down.
Yeah,
So
9 people. That's
Yeah.
carnage. That's
Yeah.
war zone carnage.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
war zone carnage.
not just war zone carnage, because at least that's you're shooting for the enemy. This was indiscriminate. It was just,
but the carnage is multiple deaths
Yeah.
in the quickest amount of time, and those weapons are designed to do just that.
right. And there's just no place in
So
the way we manage anything for weapons like
don't
that.
talk to me about Second Amendment rights when
Yeah,
you're talking about
absolutely.
weapons like that. So that's the big story that from its effect in the community, because El Paso was 22 dead,
Yeah.
Dayton was 9 dead, and the political wherewithal to pass laws that will ban these weapons doesn't exist. They can't even get legislation passed to talk about background checks, much less banning the weapons.
Right.
And so
Taking
politically,
the first step is proven impossible, much less the real step we need to take.
that's where we are. Now, 22 dead, the white supremacists.
Right.
That plays into our overall backdrop because he thinks these Mexicans, as he called them, were coming to replace true Americans,
Right.
which means white Americans. That's who he considers true Americans. Well, that language is the same kind of language that the Fox propaganda machine and their anchors spew all the time. And I believe, and in fact, I know there was a front page New York Times story that dealt with graphics that dealt with the use of language by the Fox anchors,
Right.
from replacing infestation, invasion, all those talking points that are in Trump's speech are in the Fox anchors, and that's what shows up in the screed from this El Paso shooter. And so the language that's being pushed out there, the anti-immigration rhetoric that's being pushed out
Yes.
by the Trump administration,
Yes.
folks even the media is having a hard time dealing with how to report this stuff and do we call this racist and do we not call this racist, and who are Americans. And interestingly enough, there was a story, I don't know if this is a good segue or not, but a New York Times editor, deputy editor in the Washington Bureau, got demoted because he basically was equating the fact that the freshman representatives that were from Detroit were not Midwesterners because they were from Detroit.
Yes.
And he'd been warned about the fact that he kept equating these people to not being true Midwesterners, because evidently he didn't think Detroit was part of the Midwest because it's an urban population.
Yes.
Right. And because he'd been warned a couple of times, they just said, okay, enough is enough.
Yes.
They just so you got the press and people in the press who fall into the same trap, not necessarily at Fox News.
Right.
It
And
can be at the New York Times.
Right, and I know people at the Times. I don't know this guy. I mean, I know a number of the deputy. I know a
His
couple
name
of
is
the
Weissman.
Yes, Jonathan Weissman.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to read the Times statement.
Sure.
Jonathan Weissman met with Times executive editor Dean Baquet today and apologized for his recent serious lapses in judgment. As a consequence of his actions, he has been demoted and will no longer be overseeing the team that covers Congress or be active on social media. We don't typically discuss personnel matters, but we're doing so in this instance with Jonathan's knowledge, a Times spokesman said in the statement. So this is extraordinary that they would basically throw him under the bus with his assistants, but he kind of put himself there himself. I mean,
I wouldn't term it throwing him under the bus. I would term it calling him up on the carpet for disregarding proper journalistic protocol.
Right, but some of the, I mean, if you're gonna say something on the Times social media, someone else has to have an eye on it too, some other editor. So I'm there's a little bit more blame to go around.
Well, I think they have basically curtailed the social media platform. As part of his.
Well, he can't participate in it. Yeah. I'm just saying. Over the years, we've seen the reduction in the number of eyes that look at news and tweets before they go out, and in some cases, like the Daily News, it's practically down to nothing.
So that aside, because as Media Watch, we have to deal with how media covers stuff, and when they screw up, we tell you.
Yes.
When they do a good job, we try to tell you. But and the other big story, segue from guns and white supremacist mass shootings, because the immigration story is, for me, at the heart of the matter anyway, because the Mississippi raids, where they just ransacked that community, just as the first school day started last week, and they had all these kids torn away from their parents.
And they did it under cover of other news that was breaking, the shooting.
The shooting in El Paso.
And so the news
so you got
attention was elsewhere.
A guy shooting Mexicans, slaughtering them, and ICE is raiding, quote, undocumented people working at a chicken plant or something or other in Mississippi. And so there are two things to that story that I zeroed in on immediately. One was, we're going to go after all these bad people that have come here who are criminals and done all kinds of bad things, and they've still been sitting here, and that's who we're going to gather up and round up and deport.
Right.
Remember that line? Guess who they rounded up and deported for deportation, folk? People with jobs, working hard in a community, sending their kids to the local schools and actually paying taxes from those salaries they're earning from these jobs that they have. And as the little girl was 11-year-old crying, my daddy is not a criminal. According to them, he's a criminal because he came here illegally.
Right. The
so
paperwork isn't right.
That's the crime that he has committed, and so now he is on their deportation list. Okay, fine, but you don't snatch families apart like that. Well, I shouldn't say you don't. That is their mantra. That's what they do.
But
so
that's what astounded me, because after all this talk about not breaking up families at the border and taking care of children correctly, now we have these raids where they had no plan to take care of children who were left at home while they went up and grabbed the parents.
I'm paraphrasing the ICE guy. We're a law enforcement agency. We don't do social services. That's his line.
That almost had me.
Folks, he says, we don't do social services. He could have cared less about those kids sitting out there with no parents coming to pick them up.
I almost threw something at my radio when I heard that come across WINS. I seriously froze and wanted to throw something at the radio. We don't
do social services.
That blew me away, the uncaring and the arrogance.
Let's segue from their ICE roundup raids and whatever, because I remember when Stephen Miller first came to prominence, way back in 2017, maybe right after the election, and he assumed his position as a Sunday morning spokesperson. A couple of the outlets, like I think Daily Beast and maybe the Washington Post and the New York Times, talked about this guy's hardline immigration positions. And basically, they zeroed in on the fact that his immigration goal wasn't just illegal immigrants. He wanted to target legal immigrants as well. Way back, they ran that story.
Okay.
We picked it up and ran with it here on Media Watch because it was significant to me as a, quote, immigrant, dual citizen, born but not born, naturalized for safety's sake because black and brown people have never been welcomed here, folk, from the early days when they brought us in by force.
Yes.
So they have just pulled the curtain back, and this guy, Ken Cucinelli, he's the new spokesperson. He is the Stephen Miller voice out front because he probably has a bit softer sell than Stephen Miller.
Yeah. Who can be,
He can be more likable, possibly.
Yes.
Guess what? He wasn't too likable after he opened his mouth and said, the Statue of Liberty poem was only for Europeans or something to that effect. Do you have his quote that you can call it?
Essentially, I mean, we know the famous phrase on the wall of the Statue.
Read it to our folk if you got it handy.
Well, I'm going to read his version
his
of
paraphrasing.
And it's Ken Cucinelli, the acting director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. He said, "Give me your tired and your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet and will not become a public charge." I mean, here again, had me wanting to pick up the radio and toss it. I mean, it just goes right after what you just said. People who are here, who want to come here legally and do as best they can for their family. And now he wants to support new regulations that allow them to decide who might become a public charge, who might go on welfare. It'll be subjective, up to them. And of course, that tells me that, sends up all sorts of red flags and red lights.
Yeah, you know the deal. They basically have pulled the curtain back. They want Europeans, Nordic Europeans, folks from Norway. That's the code.
Yes,
they need to be having more people from Norway. That's been Donald Trump's code. Okay, they don't want black, brown, Africans
because they might become
Asians.
Because in their opinion, those might become a public charge, and under that language, they can start turning off the spigots just by using this seemingly benign phrase, but it's meant directly at what you said. So yeah, 2 things that almost made me break my poor radio.
So the immigration thing is not going to go away because the bottom line is they're now going after legal immigrants and people with green cards. And for you folks who've never been into the immigration system, you can actually apply for what they call a green card to get legal residency status in the United States of America. And they will grant it to you. It used to be relatively, you met certain criteria. Yeah. And this public charge thing was always there, but nobody ever said, definitely that's the preeminent thing that we're going to stress, okay? And so that's how they're going to put a nail into the immigration coffin to keep the numbers down. They're going to go after anybody, never mind the bad people or the whatever.
Yes.
They're going to go after anybody. And
who they believe might become a public charge.
No, they're going to go after anybody who's black and brown who they believe might vote Democratic.
That's
it in a nutshell.
Okay.
That's all this. See, when I say we have to look at this within the broader context. We mentioned the fact that the Republican Party knew that their electorate was getting smaller.
Yes.
And so all these immigration policies that these folks have been pushing has been basically to try to keep the influx of people who tend to be a little poorer, more harder working, who then tend to be joining unions and upwardly mobile through the workforce, not the entrepreneurs, 1%ers. And so they come in larger numbers. And if they register to vote and they register to vote Democratic, then the fact that as one elected white female in the state of Arizona was saying, you know, white people are just women not having as many babies, and so we've got this influx of immigrants coming at us and coming at us and coming at us. And so the bottom line is these Republican politicians are worried about people who are black and brown who are going to not vote Republican. So kill immigration, do voter suppression, make sure you disenfranchise people who are already on the rolls, and this is part of, and trust me folks, it's the long-term strategy, because they did get that survey and they did get that estimate that said by 2040, before 2050, this is going to be a majority
minority country.
But minority, I say hell with that.
I agree. But that description you just gave of the immigrant with some skills who come to this country and raise themselves through the workplace and might join a union and might have skills and might not vote Republican based on their what they've seen on the way upwardly mobile. You just described my father. I mean, so he's the type that would be facing a big wall at this time. And when he came to this country, he came with skills. He was a tailor. He had some skills, and he ended up being an electrical wizard after that.
More skills.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. This new approach to immigration is scaring me.
Yeah.
And we have about minute and a half left.
Okay. So we touched on the three key stories.
Yes.
Immigration, guns,
yes.
no gun laws, white supremacy, and
violence,
cops killing whomever, whatever. Because all of this really gets back to who is an American.
Yeah.
That's what it all boils down to.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me to see how many different stories. I picked up my Sunday Weekend Review, and the front page of the Weekend Review was, who is an American? What is an American?
Yes.
Something to that effect, right? And then on the inside column was an article by Fernando Santos, who used to work here in New York for the New York Times as a New York Times reporter, and now it's teaching journalism at the Cronkite School of Journalism.
Okay.
And she had a long piece about after El Paso. She was an immigrant from I think, Rio. One of the South American countries.
Okay.
And so she's been doing border stuff and immigration stuff.
Okay.
She married a white man, Hispanic married a white man. She has a mixed race child. Now she's worried.
Okay, 25 seconds.
About what her mixed race child might face, since these people are targeting immigrants. So that's it in a nutshell, folks. Who is an American?
Yeah.
What's this country all about? This has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Follow us on Twitter and YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And we'll catch you the next time.